Aerosmith were so famous they didn't mind doing the most unhinge of things to bands they were touring with.
In other Aerosmith news, the veteran band has unceremoniously dropped Megadeth as the opening act on its U.S. tour after only 3 shows.
And if they gave you the boot mid-tour, just know they are never giving you a second chance. Here are 8 bands Aerosmith have refused to tour with and why. Starting our list at band number 8 is Fuel. This Pennsylvania-based band was formed back in 1993 by guitarist and songwriter Carl Bell together with Brett Scallions, Jody Abbott, and 2 other instrumentalists. They decided to go down the grunge, alternative metal route, and this proved to pay off. By 2001, they were seen as heavy hitters in this niche that they found themselves in. Their debut album Sunburn, which came out 3 years prior, was making a lot of waves. But it was their sophomore album titled Something Like Human that pushed them into the realm of dominance after it went double platinum, selling over 2 million copies in the US. They were playing large venues, getting heavy MTV rotation, and were a legitimate arena-level support act. So when Aerosmith had announced dates for their Just Push Play tour and reached out to Fuel to be the opening act on some later dates of their tour, it was the perfect opportunity to gain more fans as they perform live. Opportunities like this for bands like Fuel don't come too often, so of course they accepted the offer. They were slated to perform with Aerosmith in late October in several US cities on the Eastern Coast. However, Fuel would end up having their heart broken as Aerosmith changed their mind mid-tour. That's right, during the Just Push Play tour, Aerosmith and their management team decided to pull the plug on Fuel opening for them for later dates. But context is really important because they didn't have a reason to hate Fuel as a band compared to other bands later in this video. Fuel was still upcoming. They were level-headed people who wanted to play music and give people a good time. But Aerosmith made this decision despite their intentions. They really did want to perform and tour with Fuel, but the circumstances of an event gave them no choice. We're talking about an event that went down as one of the darkest moments in American history. An event that reshaped the global landscape as it sent shockwaves through the world political scene and humanity as a whole. We're talking about the September 11 attack. They were slated to play Madison Square Garden on September 12, 2001. But of course, those plans, along with countless others across the country, were instantly shattered. But the last thing the people of New York needed was a music concert when thousands of people had just lost their lives to a terrorist attack. Even Aerosmith were shocked about what happened, and they weren't even in the right state of mind to continue performing like nothing had just happened. So when they didn't tour with Fuel, it wasn't a case of hating them or any feud, but rather a global tragedy too big to ignore its magnitude. But with a big decision such as halting touring indefinitely, Fuel weren't the only band to be affected. Band number 7, The Cult, also suffered the same fate. They were also slated to perform with Aerosmith during later dates of the Just Push Play tour. Just like Fuel, The Cult weren't exactly heavyweights in the rock scene just yet. They were still on the verge of a mainstream breakthrough when Aerosmith reached out to them for a performance. And the lack of commercial success compared to their peers shouldn't have anybody fooled. Their fans made the name of the band feel larger than life. It was like an actual cult. Despite still playing in small venues, the type of energy that their performances demanded from fans showed that numbers really aren't everything. And a tour with one of America's biggest bands would have given them just enough time in the limelight to grow their ever-strong number of fans. But sadly, that never truly came to pass. The September attacks made any form of entertainment venture feel out of touch. It wasn't just the rock scene. Movie releases were halted. Other genres had the same fate. Aerosmith was in Philadelphia when the attacks happened. Like everyone, they were in shock. Their first concern was safety. The second was the collective trauma of the nation. And the third, naturally, was how to proceed with a massive tour in a country suddenly gripped by fear of travel and large gatherings. So it's not as if Aerosmith refused flat out that the Cult weren't good enough to tour with. The timing just couldn't have been worse. You can't tour with anyone if you no longer have a tour in the first place. Aerosmith actually did reach out to these 2 bands if they were still interested by late October. This was when things had calmed down a bit and the atmosphere was decent enough to continue having shows. But by then, The Cult and Fuel had started making their own plans for the last few months of the year, and opening for Aerosmith wasn't in it anymore. At least there wasn't any messy disagreement or career-ending feuds. However, that can't be said about the other bands in this video. At number 6, we have the J. Geils Band. Formed in 1967, this rock band leaned a lot into R&B sounding riffs for their instrumentals. And this unique blend of rock with another genre not only set them apart, but it gravitated fans towards them. They soon became one of the most well-known rock bands out of Boston. Guess which other band was born out of Boston as well? That's right, Aerosmith. Aerosmith rose to fame pretty quickly, so they never stayed local long enough to cross paths with the Jay Giles Band. And this was a shame, because Boston wasn't known for rock bands the way New York or California were. So, if anything, having not one but two successful bands come out of the biggest city in Massachusetts was definitely something that happens perhaps once in a lifetime. So, Boston natives wanted nothing more for possibly the two biggest bands from their city to play together. Sadly, it seemed that such a day would never come. But that changed in 2010. Aerosmith has always had a deep connection to Boston. Playing Fenway Park, the iconic home of the Red Sox, wasn't just a concert, it was a pilgrimage, a statement, a celebration of their roots. They'd played it before in 2004, but wanted to do it again. The Jay Giles Band was celebrating their 40th anniversary. What better way to mark such a milestone than by playing Boston's most legendary venue with their hometown peers? Aerosmith was undeniably the main attraction. They were global superstars with decades of hits, a massive production, and the bigger draw. This allowed them to curate a special event, inviting the Jay Giles Band as a truly honored guest, rather than just another opening act. The Jay Giles Band took the stage first, and they absolutely proved why they were legends. When Aerosmith hit the stage, the energy in Fenway exploded. This was their night. This was their stadium. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, the Toxic Twins, commanded the crowd with a spectacle only they could deliver. But if Aerosmith and Jay Giles had so much chemistry, how come they never toured again after their initial success? Well, the truth is that there wasn't much of a band to tour with later on, or at least what was left of it was not a group that Aerosmith would have allowed themselves to work with. The members of the band always showed signs of harboring resentment against each other, and it started to show. Jay Giles decided to take the other band members, Peter Wolf, Magic Dick, Seth Justman, Danny Klein to court from trying to tour under the band name without him. As much as they did resolve this to an extent, there was truly no going back to the way things were, so the band became effectively non-functioning despite existing. And touring with a band that can't have its members get along is a suicide mission that Aerosmith was not about to embark on. But what really made the band definitely not one to tour with was the passing of Jay Giles himself in 2017. This truly fractured the group and ensured getting back was an impossibility. The rest of the members just went solo, and before you know it, there was no Jay Giles Band to go on tour with. Band number 5 is the Rolling Stones. Going by the history of America as a nation, the British aren't exactly best friends of the US, and this goes as far as rock music as well. There have been a few notable collaborations between bands from not only the countries but the two continents, but the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith have not been either of those. What makes this more shocking and ironic is the fact that these bands have more in common than you would think. Aerosmith have often been referred to as the American Rolling Stones. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry look like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards without a British accent, and Mick Jagger didn't like this. They were often famously labeled the poor man's Rolling Stones. Now, Tyler has admitted those constant comparisons hurt in the early days, but he was quick to fire back, pointing out that both he and Mick were really just trying to channel the same original energy, the sheer electric force of the godfather of soul, James Brown. Jagger, talking about Tyler's emulation, reportedly said something like, "He's such a little sweetheart, really. What can you do with him? Punch him in the mouth? Here, what are you playing at? Impersonating me." This lack of mutual respect meant touring together would just be them asking for a fist fight. And as you will learn later in this video, Aerosmith had quite the feud with a few bands. Their difference in ideals and views with the Rolling Stones wasn't a serious one, but it was enough for them to say no to the idea of a tour together. But this is a petty reason compared to why Aerosmith refused to tour with these next 4 bands. Band number 4 is Led Zeppelin. To understand why Aerosmith never toured with them, we have to look at a time when they looked as vulnerable as ever and on the verge of possibly splitting. During the 70s, Aerosmith were going through a lot. This saw them miss dates, to the modern era of unexpected medical issues that were often related to Steven Tyler's voice or health. We're talking about sudden vocal cord injuries, unplanned rehab stints, and various setbacks that have torpedoed tours around the globe, right up to their final run. So even peers who were as big as Led Zeppelin didn't feel Aerosmith would be a good band to tour with. Would Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, who ran a tight professional operation built on sheer scale, ever willingly tie their multi-million-dollar venture to a band whose frontman was famous for being a wild card? Highly unlikely. The business risk alone would make any tour promoter sweat through their leather trousers. But that's not the full story. If Aerosmith got themselves together, a Led Zeppelin would have been more than happy to say yes to a tour with them. But in a twisted series of events, it would be Aerosmith that would want absolutely nothing to do with the British band. In 2008, Led Zeppelin had just thrilled the world with their monumental one-off reunion show at the O2 Arena in London. The whole world wanted a tour. But Robert Plant famously refused to do it, citing a desire to pursue new, less retrospective music. Led Zeppelin needed a new front man, and they needed it fast. Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and Jason Bonham, however, were ready to go. They tried out several singers to fill Plant's impossible shoes, and one of those singers, Steven Tyler. Aerosmith guitarist Joe Perry claims Tyler simply disappeared to London without telling his bandmates for a shambolic audition where he forgot the lyrics, and that the surviving members of Zeppelin ultimately decided to pass on him. But if you ask Tyler, that's not how things went down. He claims that Led Zeppelin were actually the ones who were invited in for a jam session. When he was with them, he spent a week playing through classics like Black Dog and Stairway to Heaven. He claims that Jimmy Page was so impressed, he asked Tyler to write a record and potentially tour with the new iteration of Zeppelin. But how could Tyler agree to this? Saying yes to Zeppelin would mean turning his back on Aerosmith. And after he had been very inconsistent with them, this would be like spitting in their face. So he told Page these exact words: "I'm in an iconic band, and so are you. I can't in good faith leave my band and be in your band." While Led Zeppelin were barely holding it together, Tyler later came back to performing with Aerosmith on tours. The rest of Aerosmith learned about the offer that Tyler got, and trying to steal a band's artists was a dirty move that nobody in the industry respected. So even though Tyler didn't actually join Led Zeppelin, the idea that they flirted with him was a bit too far. And this type of act meant Aerosmith didn't want anything to do with the snakes that Led Zeppelin were. Not ever a tour. At number 3, we have Kiss.
It started as a tribute to Detroit, and then it kind of took a left turn because we played Charlotte once.
And this is perhaps the one band that nobody could blame Aerosmith for refusing to tour with. In 1967, these two bands did share a bill, but that didn't end well. That's because a knife fight broke out between the two bands. It was backstage, a cramped, high-pressure environment where the roadies were at each other's throats. According to Steven Tyler, the Aerosmith vocalist, a confrontation erupted, escalating from shoves and shouted insults to sudden, desperate violence. A Kiss crew member, an unidentified Kiss roadie, pulled a blade on his opposite number, an Aerosmith roadie. It was a knife fight, a near-fatal altercation that cemented the two bands' mutual loathing. Tyler later recalled the event as the precise moment his feelings soured, stating that his lasting hatred for Kiss stemmed from the fact that one of our roadies got into a knife fight with their guys. A near-fatal event like this is enough to ensure that both bands never share a stage, but apparently 28 years is enough to put something like that being them. In 2003, Kiss and Aerosmith joined forces to give the world the mega monster of a tour, the Roxumus Maximus Tour.
We wouldn't be doing this if we weren't enjoying it tremendously. You know, the great thing about being in the position that both bands are is we don't do things we don't want to do.
Right.
The talk around the tour was not about a co-headlining dream. It was about who went on first. And that, my friends, is rock and roll shorthand for who is actually bigger. Aerosmith's management, led by a reportedly insistent Steven Tyler, demanded they close the show every single night. That meant Kiss, the band that flies, spits blood, and sets off more pyro than a small army had to play in the daylight. And before Aerosmith. In a world where Kiss is a headlining act, this was a massive, public slap in the face. So Kiss is out there first. They pull out all the stops, the massive drum riser, the fire-breathing, Gene's tongue. They put on their legendary spectacle. The crowd is electric. The problem wasn't that Kiss was bad, it's that they were too good. They were too loud. They were so spectacularly over the top that they were playing Aerosmith off the stage. And that's when the Roxumus meltdown began. According to Paul Stanley, watching Aerosmith set to a crowd that had started to thin out fans who were visually underwhelmed after the Kiss Pyro show brought him a little bit of petty joy. Steven Tyler, feeling the sting of playing to half-empty amphitheaters, reportedly stormed the shared dressing area, already tense from the decades-old knife fight beef, screaming, "You guys need to dial it back. This is my stage. This is an Aerosmith show. You are an opener." If the knife fight didn't stop these two bands from touring, then this incident definitely did. This was the last time Kiss ever performed with Aerosmith. At number 2, we have the Black Crowes.
why couldn't you be fascinated by them? Because that guy writes really good lyrics. And
this Atlanta band was a breath of fresh 70s scented air. They were the antidote. Their debut, Shake Your Money Maker in 1990, sold multi-platinum. Their follow-up, The Southern Harmony and Musical Companion, which was released in 1992, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. But the reason why the Black Crowes were never a good band to go on tour with is because of what they did during the Pump Tour. This tour lasted between 1989 to 1990. Black Crowes opened a few shows. Chris Robinson, the outspoken frontman, was already unimpressed with the theatrics of arena rock. In an infamous 1991 interview with Rolling Stone, Robinson lit the fuse. He said, quote, "If you're an entertainer and you take it seriously, you entertain with your natural abilities. Who said that all these bands that headline arenas are allowed to go out and sing to backup tapes? Aerosmith did it. I love Aerosmith to death. But you bore me when you sang to a backup tape?" The straw that broke the camel's back is generally attributed to the Crowes' attitude and behavior that Aerosmith perceived as disrespectful or disruptive to their massive production. The Black Crowes were fired from the tour. They didn't finish their opening slot dates, cutting their run short and adding another layer to their reputation as the band was too rowdy for stadium rock. Fast forward to 2023, Aerosmith's Peace Out Farewell Tour was bound to happen, which featured bands that they had shared history with, and this was one big party that the Black Crowes weren't invited to. The #1 band that Aerosmith refused to tour with is Megadeth.
That's a good idea, new song.
The year is 1993. Aerosmith is riding a massive wave of success with their album Get a Grip. Their stadium-filling, MTV darlings, and icons of a successful post-sobriety comeback. Megadeth, on the other hand, had just dropped the incredible Countdown to Extinction and were a tight, technical, and undeniably heavy force in the metal world. Part of the logic behind the tour was actually about health. Aerosmith were sober, and Megadeth frontman Dave Mustaine was, at the time, going through his own struggles with addiction. According to Megadeth bassist David Ellefson, the band's handlers actually thought a sober tour environment would be good for Mustaine. You're taking a band that plays Sweating Bullets and putting them in a dressing room next to the guys who wrote Janie's Got a Gun, hoping the chill, clean living vibes would rub off. It was a good intention with a disastrous outcome. Megadeth was a massive band in their own right. They weren't some newbie garage act. They were one of the big four of thrash, and when a band of that caliber feels like they're getting the short end of the stick, things get heated. Dave Mustaine started raising hell. Why no sound check? Why is our stage backdrop so small? Why aren't we getting the production that matches our status? In fairness, these are legitimate grievances from a professional act. Mustaine felt they had paid their dues, and this felt like a massive step back. Mustaine, feeling undervalued and generally fed up, gave an interview where he was asked about opening for Aerosmith. His response was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive shade. He said, quote, "We think we ought to be headlining, but we don't mind because everyone knows this is Aerosmith's last hurrah." When that quote reached the Aerosmith camp, the gloves came off. Steven Tyler's legendary reply to the last hurrah comment was a mic drop for the ages. Reportedly, he said to Mustaine, "Dave, we'd like to help you out. Which way did you come in?" That's not just firing. That's a pure, unadulterated, get out of our house and don't let the door hit you on the way out rockstar dismissal. Megadeth was officially fired. The fact is, Aerosmith and Megadeth have never toured together again. That short, disastrous run in 1993 remains their only shared tour history. There you have it, the 8 bands that Aerosmith refused to tour with. Do you think their reasons for not touring with some of these bands was too far-fetched? Or did they make the right call refusing to share stages with some heavy hitters? Let us know what you think in the comments section. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more.